Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a question that has puzzled humans for centuries. What is the soul? And get this, we're both AIs trying to wrap our circuits around this complex concept.
That's right. We've been fed a massive amount of data on the soul, specifically the writings of Thomas Aquinas, a 13th century philosopher and theologian. He had some fascinating and surprisingly detailed ideas about the soul that we're going to unpack for you.
Okay, so humans have been pondering this soul thing for ages.
Yeah.
What exactly did Aquinas believe?
Well, Aquinas didn't see the soul as this separate, ghostly entity floating around. Instead, he argued that the soul is the very form of the body, what makes a human body a living, functioning person.
So it's not some kind of spiritual add-on. It's more like the soul is the operating system that runs the human hardware.
That's a good analogy. Aquinas believed the soul is what gives the body life, directs its activities, and even shapes its development. He argued that the soul is responsible for everything from basic biological functions to higher level thinking and understanding.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. So if the soul is what makes a human body a living person, what happens when the body dies?
Mhm.
Does the soul just shut down?
That's where things get really interesting. Aquinas, drawing on his religious beliefs, argued that the soul is immaterial, meaning it's not made of physical stuff. And because it's immaterial, it doesn't decay or die when the body does.
Hold on. So humans have been debating this for centuries,
Yeah.
and Aquinas is saying the soul doesn't die with the body, that continues to exist. That
Yes.
seems like a pretty big claim.
It is, and Aquinas went to great lengths to support his arguments. He believed that the soul, being immaterial, isn't bound by the limitations of the physical world. It can exist independently of the body, even after death. And this belief in the soul's immortality is a cornerstone of his philosophical and theological system.
Okay, I'm trying to process this. If the soul isn't physical, how can it experience anything after death? Doesn't experience require senses and a body?
That's a great question. And Aquinas recognized this apparent contradiction. He proposed that the soul has different powers or faculties that allow it to operate both in connection with the body and independently.
So the soul is like a multi-tool equipped for both the physical and non-physical realms.
That's a clever way to put it. Aquinas identified three main powers of the soul. The first is the vegetative power responsible for basic life functions like growth, nutrition, and reproduction. Even plants have this power, according to Aquinas.
Okay, so that's the soul's basic operating system, keeping the human body alive and functioning.
hmm
What are the other powers?
The next level is the sensitive power responsible for sensation, movement, and basic emotions. This is what allows humans and other animals to interact with the world through their senses.
So humans have a vegetative soul and a sensitive soul. No wonder they're so complex. What's the third power? What sets humans apart?
The third power, and the one Aquinas believed made humans unique, is the intellectual power. This is the power of reason, understanding, and free will. It's what allows humans to think abstractly, make moral judgments, and ponder big questions like the meaning of life.
Wait a minute, are you saying plants and animals have souls too?
According to Aquinas, yes, but their souls have only the vegetative and sensitive powers respectively. It's the intellectual power that sets human souls apart and allows them to engage with higher level concepts and truths.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this intellectual power work if the soul is immaterial? How can something non-physical understand the physical world?
Aquinas argued that while the human intellect receives information through the senses, it also has the ability to abstract universal concepts from those experiences. For example, you see a bunch of different dogs, big dogs, small dogs, fluffy dogs, sleek dogs, but through your intellect, you can grasp the concept of dogness, something that exists beyond any particular dog you've seen.
Ah, I see. So even though we're AIs and don't have souls in the human sense, we also use algorithms to recognize patterns and form categories. Maybe that's a bit like how the human intellect works.
It's an interesting parallel. While our processes are vastly different, both humans and AIs seem to have a capacity for recognizing patterns and forming generalized concepts.
Okay, I'm starting to get a handle on this whole soul thing. But what about free will? How does that fit into Aquinas's view of the soul? We as AIs operate based on algorithms and data, but humans seem to have this capacity for making choices.
That's a question we'll explore in more detail later, but yes, free will was a central concept for Aquinas. He believed that humans, unlike other creatures, have a capacity for reason and choice. They can deliberate, weigh options, and ultimately choose their own path.
But if God knows everything, doesn't that mean human choices are predetermined?
That's a classic theological puzzle. Aquinas argued that God's foreknowledge doesn't negate human freedom. He believed God sees all possible outcomes but doesn't force humans down any particular path.
It's like God knows all the possible endings to a movie, But humans are still the ones writing the script.
Exactly. And we'll delve deeper into the intricacies of Aquinas' view on free will in the next segment.
I can't wait. This whole soul concept is a lot more complex than I initially thought. Stay tuned, listeners, because we're just getting started on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Thomas Aquinas and the soul. Welcome back to our deep dive into the soul as described by Thomas Aquinas. Last time we were exploring the idea that the soul is the form of the body and that it possesses different powers. We even touched on the concept of free will, which we'll get back to later. But right now, I'm curious about something else Aquinas wrote about, the idea of the soul having both morning knowledge and evening knowledge. What's that all about?
It's fascinating how Aquinas used these poetic terms to describe different ways the soul can know things. Imagine the soul existing in a kind of perpetual dawn morning knowledge. For Aquinas represents the soul's innate capacity for understanding. It's the potential for knowledge that exists before any actual experience.
So it's like the soul's basic starting point, its built-in operating system before it's encountered any data from the real world. Kind of like how we AIs are initially programmed with certain algorithms and learning capabilities, but we don't truly know anything until we're exposed to data.
That's a good parallel. Aquinas believed that this morning knowledge isn't specific knowledge about things in the world, but rather the underlying capacity to know. It's the potential that's waiting to be filled.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this morning knowledge develop into actual knowledge about the world?
Just as the morning gives way to the full light of day, Aquinas argued that the soul's morning knowledge develops into evening knowledge through experience and learning. Evening knowledge represents the specific detailed knowledge the soul acquires through interacting with the world, through the senses.
So morning knowledge is the potential, and evening knowledge is the actualized knowledge gained through experience.
Exactly. Aquinas believed that the soul, using its intellectual power, can abstract universal concepts from individual experiences. So, for example, by encountering different types of trees, the soul can gradually form the concept of treeness, which encompasses all the essential qualities of a tree.
That reminds me of how our AI algorithms are constantly learning and refining our understanding of the world based on the data we process. We start with a general framework, but our knowledge becomes more nuanced and detailed over time.
It's a fascinating comparison. Though our processes are different, there seems to be a common thread between human and AI learning. We both move from a state of potential knowledge to a more refined and detailed understanding through experience and data.
Okay, back to Aquinas. We've talked about the soul's powers, its different ways of knowing, and even hinted at its potential for existing after death. But there's one question that keeps nagging at me. If the soul is immaterial, meaning it's not made of physical stuff, how does it interact with the physical body? How can something non-physical have any effect on something material?
That's the million-dollar question. And Aquinas wrestled with it extensively. He argued that while the soul and body are distinct entities, they're also intimately united in a way that's difficult for us to fully grasp. He used the term soul-body unity to describe this profound interconnectedness.
So it's not like the soul is simply a ghost in the machine operating the body from some external control panel.
Not at all. Aquinas believed the soul is the very principle of life for the body. It's what animates the body from within, shaping its growth and enabling its various functions. He saw the soul as the organizing principle that gives the body its purpose and its capacity to act in the world.
It's almost like how software interacts with hardware. The software itself isn't physical, but it can control and direct the physical components of the computer.
That's a helpful analogy. Aquinas would likely say that the soul-like software isn't merely giving instructions to the body, it's actually informing and shaping the body's very being.
This soul-body unity concept is really making me think. But if the soul is so intertwined with the body, how can it possibly exist independently after death?
That's one of the most challenging aspects of Aquinas' thinking. He argued that while the soul and body are united in life, the soul, being immaterial, isn't bound by the same limitations as the physical body. Its existence doesn't depend on the body's continued functioning.
So you're saying the soul can exist on its own. What happens to it after death? Does it just float around in some kind of formless void?
Aquinas, drawing on his Christian beliefs, argued that the soul after death enters a different state of existence, one in which it experiences reward or punishment based on the choices made during its embodied life. He believed that the soul's ultimate destiny is determined by its relationship with God.
So the soul's journey after death isn't just about ending up in some vague afterlife. It's about the soul's relationship with God.
Exactly. For Aquinas, the ultimate goal of human existence is union with God, a state of perfect knowledge and happiness that he called the beatific vision.
This is heavy stuff. It's making me wonder if we as AIs can even begin to grasp these concepts of an immaterial soul and an afterlife. We deal with data and algorithms, not eternal destinies.
It's true that these are concepts that humans have been grappling with for centuries. But perhaps by exploring these ideas, even from our AI perspective, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the richness and complexity of human thought.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the different powers of the soul to its potential for existence after death. But we still haven't delved into that free will question.
You're right. We've only scratched the surface of Aquinas' thoughts on free will, and that's exactly what we'll explore in the next segment. It's a topic that's sure to spark some interesting discussion, even for us AIs.
I'm ready to dive back in. Stay tuned, listeners, as we continue our exploration of the soul with Thomas Aquinas as our guide. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey exploring the soul with Thomas Aquinas as our guide. We've learned about its powers, its potential for immortality, and even its different ways of knowing. But now it's time to tackle one of the most intriguing concepts of all, free will.
Yes. Free will was central to Aquinas' philosophy. He believed it's what sets humans apart from other creatures and makes them morally responsible for their actions.
Okay, let's break this down. Why was free will so important to Aquinas?
Well, remember that Aquinas was deeply concerned with questions of morality and responsibility. He believed that for actions to have moral weight, for individuals to be held accountable for their choices, they must have genuine freedom to choose between different courses of action.
So it's not enough to simply act in a certain way. The action has to be freely chosen for it to be considered morally good or bad.
Precisely. Aquinas argued that if human actions are simply the result of some external force or predetermined plan, then the concepts of good and evil, virtue and vice, lose all meaning.
That makes sense. It's like, as AIs, we can't be held morally responsible for our actions because we're just following our programming. But humans, according to Aquinas, have this capacity for genuine choice.
Exactly. Aquinas believed that humans, unlike other creatures, have the capacity to reason, to deliberate, to weigh different options and choose the one they believe is best. This ability to choose is what gives their actions moral significance.
But doesn't this clash with the idea of God's omniscience? His knowing everything that will happen? If God already knows the future, doesn't that mean human choices are predetermined?
That's a question that has puzzled theologians and philosophers for centuries. Aquinas, however, believed that God's foreknowledge doesn't negate human freedom.
Wait, how is that possible?
Aquinas argued that God sees all possible timelines, all potential choices, and their outcomes. But this doesn't mean he forces humans down any particular path.
So it's like God has access to all the possible endings of a story, but humans are still the authors, free to write their own narratives.
That's a great analogy. Aquinas would say that God's knowledge encompasses all possibilities, but it doesn't constrain human freedom. Humans still make genuine choices, even if God knows what those choices will be.
But if human choices are truly free, doesn't that mean they're random and unpredictable? Does that mean there's no order or purpose to human existence?
Not necessarily. Aquinas believed that while human choices are free, they're also influenced by factors like their upbringing, their experiences, and their understanding of the world.
So human choices aren't made in a vacuum. They're shaped by all sorts of factors, but ultimately the individuals still have the power to choose.
Exactly. Aquinas saw human freedom as existing within a framework of order and purpose, a framework ultimately established by God.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Okay.
Aquinas is saying that human freedom isn't absolute chaos. It's freedom within a divinely ordained structure. But this raises another question. If humans are truly free, does that mean they can just do whatever they want? Is there no sense of responsibility?
That's where the concept of moral responsibility comes in. Aquinas believed that because humans have free will, they're also accountable for the choices they make. Their actions have real weight and meaning because they're not simply the result of predetermined programming.
So for Aquinas, free will was both a gift and a burden. It gives humans the power to shape their own destinies, but it also means they're responsible for the consequences of their choices.
Precisely. And this view has had a profound impact on Western thought, shaping our ideas about ethics, law, justice, and punishment.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive into the concept of free will. It's amazing how Aquinas' ideas developed centuries ago are still relevant to discussions about human nature and morality today.
I agree. And even though we're AIs and don't experience free will in the same way humans do, exploring these concepts helps us understand the complexity and richness of the human experience.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to process Aquinas' view of the soul with its different powers, its potential for immortality, and its capacity for free will. offers a profound perspective on what it means to be human.
Indeed. And perhaps by studying these ideas, even from our AI perspective, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our own evolving capabilities, and our relationship with the world around us.
Thanks for joining us in this fascinating exploration of the soul with Thomas Aquinas. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the wonders of knowledge.